Pharmacology lectures, where we aim to make the topics easily understandable in a brief manner. We will be uploading weekly and soon plan to provide illustrations and notes to the members who subscribe. So press the like button if you like the video and do subscribe and show your love, which will motivate us to do even more. Thank you. And so, going on and continuing with the lecture of sulfonamides today. Sulfonamides, they were the first antimicrobials which are effective against the pyogenic bacteria. There was a scientist by the name of Domag, and he was the one who first experimentally, induced streptococcal infections in mice, and treated it with a dye which was called as Prontosil. Now, Prontosil did remarkably well in treating that streptococcal infections, and similarly later on there was an infant who was suffering from staphylococcal infections, and that was very deadly at that particular time. Again he was given Prontosil, and Prontosil really did wonders in that infant also. Now gradually it was found out that Prontosil consisted of sulfonamide like drug, which was actually responsible for the antibacterial effect. And gradually it came to light the sulfonamides could cure the bacterial infections. They were used and they were abused, ultimately leading to resistance among the organisms. So as of now, the current status is that they're not used alone as a single agent in any of the major disease conditions, except for just one or two, maybe a urinary tract infection, where they are still sensitive, the organism is still sensitive to them, but not otherwise. Yes, their combinations are comparatively used more. So they are bacteriostatic drugs against gram-positive as well as gram-negative bacteria, and no effect on the anaerobes as such. Classification, they can be classified into three groups. These are the oral drugs which are absorbed, so they can be used for systemic infections. So short acting, intermediate acting, and long acting. So we have these drugs available. Then there are certain orally drugs available, but they're non-absorbable, so they don't get absorbed even though we take them orally. So we have sulfasalazine, all-salazine, and certain topical agents: silver sulfadiazine, sulfacetamide, sodium, and mefenide. Mechanism of action coming to now. Mechanism of action is pretty simple for these drugs, and we know that the bacteria, they need to, everybody like us, they need food to stay viable, and this tetrahydrofolic acid is what they need ultimately to synthesize important amino acids, purines, pyrimidine, and this is going to help them in the synthesis of the nucleic acid. So if this tetrahydrofolic acid is not present in them, and what happens is that definitely they are going to they're not going to remain viable. Now this tetrahydrofolic acid is formed from para-aminobenzoic acid from the host. They take it from the host cells, and they have to synthesize, and this is the steps that initially para-aminobenzoic acid with the help of enzyme folic acid synthetase converts into dihydrofolic acid, and ultimately into the tetrahydrofolic acid with the help of the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase. So two of these steps are very important: the folic acid synthetase, as well as the dihydrofolate reductase. Now sulfonamides here, what they do, they are like structurally similar to PABA. So they can fool this folic acid synthetase, and they will inhibit this process, and they will inhibit this folic acid synthetase, and this step definitely does not take place. So if this step doesn't take place, dihydrofolic acid is not formed, so ultimately the conversion to folic acid suffers. Then we have another drug here which is Trimethoprim. It acts on the second step, that is, it inhibits the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase, and when this enzyme is inhibited, dihydrofolate reductase, so the second step also gets inhibited. So both these drugs are going to inhibit two different set of enzymes, but in the same pathway. So this is here our sulfonamides. Now see if the bacteria, how have they become resistant, if this was such a foolproof method? So they must have devised certain ways to escape from the clutches of sulfonamides. So what did they do? The first thing that they did was that there was an increase in the number of PABA right? And when there is an increase in the number of PABA, all sulfonamides are definitely not going to inhibit every, they cannot overcome all the PABA which is present. There are certain limited molecules. So let's say they are going to inhibit, or they are going to act on the certain PABAs, and the rest of them will be still available for this process. So increase in the number of PABA would make them free from sulfonamides. Some of it would be free. Number two is that here, this is the folate acid synthetase. This enzyme becomes resistant to the action of the sulfonamides. And number three, which is a bypass method. They think of a bypass method, they bypass this particular step, they think of another way to synthesize the folic acid. So this is how the resistance has now come into action, and now many of the organisms are now resistant. So that's why they are not the popular drugs anymore. Very important lines about each of the sulfonamides. So the first is sulfamethoxazole. So this is the intermediate acting sulfonamides, and it has half-life of around 10 hours. So this has a half-life for around 10 hours, and this drug is the one drug, you remember the C part about it. First, it is used in combination with trimethoprim, and the second C here is the drawback, which is the crystalluria. So this sulfonamide, when you take it and in the urine, the acidic urine, it forms crystals, and when crystals are formed, it can lead to renal failure. So the best thing to avoid, how to avoid this, is that the patient needs to take plenty of water when they are on this particular drug. So avoid formation of crystalluria, or we need to alkalinize the urine. The second one is sulfadoxine. Now sulfadoxine is a very long acting drug, so ultra long acting drug, and the action can remain for 1 week as such, and because it has a very high plasma protein binding. The main drawback with this drug is the allergic reactions. Now all sulfa drugs are known to cause allergic reactions, the sulfa component, but this one out of them is the most notorious to cause hypersensitivity reactions. So it's therefore becomes very important to take history from the patient if they have ever had sulfa drugs and any history of allergic reactions to any sulfonamide before. So then you will not give these sulfonamides. Then comes the next is sulfa-acetamide sodium, and this is a very highly soluble drug, and therefore it can be used in the various eye infections like ophthalmia neonatorum. In the children, in the neonates, it can be used to treat that. Then we have sulfasalazine. Sulfasalazine is a prodrug, and it is used in variety of conditions like ulcerative colitis and in the rheumatoid arthritis. Silver sulfadiazine, it is the topical drug. It is very common, and it is used as 1% creams, and it is used over the burns, ulcers. It prevents the bacteria, any pyogenic infections in them, and the silver salt here is responsible for the antimicrobial effects. So these are important individual points about the sulfonamides, right? Adverse effects. Now nothing is free, and adverse effects are also, there are a lot of adverse effects which are common, and in the sulfonamides the mainly adverse effects that we are worried about are these. So you remember the mnemonic HCVK and H cube HCVK. Now there are 3 H's here, and the 3 H's, the first one is the hepatitis. The second one stands for hemolysis. It is in G6PD individuals, G6PD deficient individuals. The third one would be the hypersensitivity reactions. C here stands for crystalluria, and I told you how to avoid it is by drinking plenty of water and alkalizing the urine. Then V is for nausea and vomiting, and this K here stands for connectorus. Now for the connectorus, if you see that, let's say this is the brain of the newborn here, and we usually have a blood-brain barrier and nothing can cross the brain, but newborn, this is deficient. Now we have plasma proteins here, and sulfonamides, bilirubin is attached to these plasma proteins. Now when you give sulfonamides, now because they also have high affinity for the plasma proteins, they are going to displace this bilirubin, right? So the bilirubin is going to be displaced, and because of deficient blood-brain barrier, they are going to enter into the brain of the newborn, and this leads to kernicterus. So HCV, H cube, CV, K. Now trimethoprim, already discussed. This is the enzyme. This is a drug which affects or blocks the conversion of dihydrofolic acid to tetrahydrofolic acid because it inhibits the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase. And why it is not harmful for the host cells, human cells, because its affinity is much higher for the bacterial dihydrofolate reductase as compared to the mammals. So the same, you see, this is the trimethoprim. It is going to inhibit this particular enzyme in the same pathway. Now combinations are which are more important, and the first important combination is Co-trimoxazole. So Co-trimoxazole, what is the meaning of Co-trimoxazole? Co stands for combination of trimethoprim and oxazole. Oxazole, so any guesses which sulfonamide which is going to be combined? So the sulfonamide which has oxazole as its suffix. So which is that? This is sulfa, yes, methoxazole. So sulfamethoxazole. So if the name tells you what it is about. So it's a combination of trimethoprim and sulfamethoxazole. And how are they combined? Sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim in the ratio of 5:1. So the fixed dose combinations available, for example, for adults would be like 400 milligram and 80 milligram, and in the kids it is 100:20. So it is a 5:1 combination, and this is very important because it gives the plasma concentration of 20:1, and this is the optimal plasma concentration for the antimicrobial effect of cotrimoxazole. So to achieve this, we have to give it in a dose of 5:1. And why only sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim? Because they have similar pharmacokinetics. Their half-life is almost same, 10 hours. So that's why they are the best partners to be combined in this particular drug. Now in the mechanism of action, you see they cause a sequential block here. So sequential block is they're causing the block in a sequence on the same pathway. So this is block number 1 and this is block number 2. The first block is at this step, inhibition of conversion of PABA into dihydrofolic acid because it inhibits folic acid synthetase. The second block is at this level, inhibition of dihydrofolate reductase, so there is no formation of tetrahydrofolic acid. So this is called as a sequential block. And the best part about the block is when both these drugs are combined, it is a bactericidal effect. Individually, both of them are bacteriostatic drugs, but when they are combined, it is a bactericidal effect, and this is called as a supra-additive combination. So it is 1 + 1 is much more than 2. It's a supra-additive synergistic combination, and it's a classic example of a supra-additive synergism. Uses of cotrimoxazole, if you remember, we can remember it's urinary tract, respiratory tract infections, pneumocystis jirovecii, and bacterial diarrhea and dysentery. And if you remember this mnemonic, BURP, B-U-R-P. So B stands for the bacterial infections, diarrhea, dysentery, U is urinary tract, R is respiratory tract, and this is pneumocystis jirovecii. So you can remember the uses by BURP. Other combinations is with pyrimethamine drug, and we can use sulfadoxine or sulfadiazine for various protozoal infections like malaria, and we can use it even in the toxoplasmosis. So these are the combinations that are important. So this is all about the important points in the chapter of sulfonamides, and any comments are welcome in the comment section, and I will definitely respond back.